Good morning, Namaskar. It's almost certain that as the infection levels rise, India will move into lockdown 5. But given the fact that you need to keep economic activity alive, lockdown 5 will probably be even more diluted than lockdown 4. So we'll probably know the details in a day or so. The interesting thing here is that in the case of Delhi, where the infection levels continue to rise, the Delhi government has figured out that it needs to create capacity very quickly. So it has taken 5 hotels and given their command, so to speak, to 5 hospitals. And it is up to the hospitals now to work with the hotels and to make them into COVID-19 hospitals. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but it's going to create a lot of capacity. And sort of a neighborhood concept has been taken. So the Sheraton Hotel in Saket has been given to the Max Hospital, which is also in Saket. And the Surya Hotel in New Friends Colony has been given to Apollo Hospital, which is not very far away. So the idea is to create capacity. In the case of Delhi, it's interesting that just yesterday, the Delhi government added 82 more people to its death toll. These are not 82 people who died yesterday. These are 82 people who died in the last 1 week. But these are deaths that the Delhi government was not willing to call COVID deaths. So finally, a committee was set up, and that committee has declared that these are COVID deaths. So it's basically telling you about how the infection levels are rising, quite dramatically, and the Delhi government is willing to convert hotels into hospitals. I presume this is where you get the term hospitality from. But on a more serious note, clearly the infection levels in Delhi are getting quite out of hand. They're getting out of our hand in Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad is a city that we'll probably return to over a period of time. The infection levels in Bombay are something we've talked about earlier. Now to come to the really big story of today. The really big story of today is really a story that we've been talking about for many, many years now. It is that of the Q4 GDP, which is released yesterday. The data was released yesterday. And the data that you've got shows that we're talking about GDP at an 11-year low. So certainly we've been hit by COVID, but let nobody make a mistake. COVID is not something that has crippled the economy. The economy was more or less crippled long before COVID began. So so basically what it means is that we're going to have a very, very slow return to growth. In fact, some of the numbers that were put out yesterday, I'll just check one of them. One of the numbers that was put out was that in Q4, you had a growth rate of 3.1%. Now that growth rate itself, it appears, is likely to be revised downward. So people think that growth is optimistic. Because, mind you, Q4 was a quarter. It's a quarter from January, February, March this year. So January, February, March this year was a quarter in which the sales of commercial vehicles, for example, fell by 42%. It's a quarter in which credit growth fell by 20%. So despite this, the data tells you that manufacturing growth grew by about 1% in this quarter. So that's clearly not feasible. So in all likelihood, most experts tell you that you will find the growth rate for Q4 and then finally for the whole of 1920, that growth rate being revised further when the next set of estimates come up. But it's interesting. This leads up to a point that we've been making both in the print, in the FE newspaper, as well as on these videos over the last few weeks. A lot of people who felt that the government was giving India a very small stimulus, clearly were just not understanding what was going on. Just to give you a number, for FY20, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had budgeted a fiscal deficit of 3.3% of GDP. So for the year ended March 2020, she was looking at a fiscal deficit of 3.3% of GDP. That's already up to about 4.5 or 4.6% now, because the GDP numbers have just come out and the GDP growth has collapsed compared to what she had estimated. And in fact, if you add what I call the off-budget numbers or the little fudge that they do every year in the budget, we're talking about a central government real fiscal deficit of about 6.5 to 7% of GDP already. Now that number is going to get dramatically worse this year in FY21. So the question of Prime Minister Modi or Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman being able to give you a larger stimulus is frankly, you are being wildly optimistic to expect a larger stimulus than the one that you've got. We'll probably have more details on this in a few days. But for right now, move to the really big story of today. That's a global story. It's a fun story. It's a story of Twitter versus President Trump of the United States of America. So essentially, for those who haven't been following this every day, President Trump made a tweet about he was opposing mail-in ballots. basically people mailing in their votes, and he said the mail-in ballots will cause a huge fraud. So he tweeted about it. Yeah. So the interesting thing is that for the first time that this has ever happened. So President Trump has been accused very often of making statements that aren't exactly fully true. So there's a little bit of fabrication. Sometimes people say there's a lot of fabrication. So President Trump made this statement, and suddenly you found that when this tweet was there on Twitter, it basically a little line came up there. It said get more facts. So when you clicked on get more facts, you were taken to some links of CNN, of Washington Post, basically explaining why the president was wrong when he said what he said. Now, at one level, I think Twitter or anybody putting out these cautionary things to people, these little flags to their viewers or their users, is a good thing, that you want to investigate this a little bit more. But here's the problem. Twitter hasn't done this for other people in the past, or it hasn't done this for enough people for us to really know that it happened. And if Twitter is going to say that President Trump has got it wrong, is Twitter now going to put out a similar number or a similar disclaimer for each and every tweet? You see, keep in mind, and this is the lead column in Financial Express today. This is a point that it makes. Keep in mind that everything that people tweet are not irrefutable facts. So if you say what year did India get its independence in, there is only one answer to that. So if somebody writes 1948, Twitter can very clearly put out a line there saying that you got it wrong here. But lots of things are opinions. What is the size of the stimulus package that Prime Minister Modi announced the other day? A lot of analysts think it's about 2 lakh crores, so it's about 1% of GDP. It's not the number that Prime Minister Modi talked about. But Financial Express has said actually the stimulus is all the extra spending that the government is going to do. So it has to take into account the extra borrowing the central government is going to do. It's going to take into account the extra borrowing that the states are going to do. So when you look at that number, the stimulus is not 2 lakh crores. So now when the Prime Minister of India puts out a tweet saying that I've given a stimulus of 20 lakh crores, will Twitter put out a little line there saying get the facts? Essentially, I don't know how many tweets are put out on Twitter every day. But essentially what Twitter is doing is it's saying, I'm going to set up a massive machinery which is going to put a disclaimer or something like that. You want to read this first, or something like that on each and every tweet. Can you imagine that? So Twitter clearly cannot do that. So if Twitter is now going to select certain people and say, okay, I think you want to relook these facts, or these are alternative views to what this gentleman or lady has tweeted, then it is selective. In fact, this is the point that President Trump is making. So as I said, a lot of President Trump's statements aren't exactly, the unvarnished truth. But the point is that is Twitter now going to be able to put this on everybody's feed? And if they don't do it for everybody's feed and they put it only for a few people, then it becomes selective. And this is the point that President Trump has made. Essentially, he's passed an executive order which says that something like Facebook or Twitter is no longer public square. So in the past, what happened is when people saw things on Twitter or Facebook that they were upset about, they were forbidden by law to sue Twitter or Facebook, because it was said that this is the public square. This is a place where people just come and talk. This is not a newspaper where the editor or the publisher is actually looking at everything. So Twitter and Facebook don't have control over what is being posted. So they cannot be held accountable. They cannot be sued. So President Trump is going to remove that. He's actually instructing his law officers to come out with rules which remove that safety valve for social media. And in a sense, most people across the world, in fact, have rushed to defend Twitter. But I want to make a point here that basically social media also needs to be responsible. And frankly, when social media starts to decide that it's going to censor people, or that it's going to caution people that you want to view this person's tweet with care, or it just removes certain, in the case of the president of Brazil, he made a statement saying that hydroxychloroquine was basically working very well to cure corona. So Facebook removed that speech, and Mark Zuckerberg has said that that speech was clearly incorrect. It was fake news, so I removed it. But if Twitter and Facebook are going to decide what is fake and what is real, in a sense they have become publishers. They're no longer the public square. This is an interesting debate. I don't think we've heard the end of it. We've just seen the beginning. The issue has been joined. It's probably going to go to a lot of courts in America. It's going to be discussed by people all over the world. So stay tuned. I think we've got a very interesting battle on our hands. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.